From the very first second the sky tore open around her, Captain Elena Ross understood that this was no ordinary mission. The clouds churned like a living beast, swallowing her F-18 whole as alarms blared through the cockpit, jolting her heart into a rhythm she had never felt before. She had flown through storms, engines failures, missile locks, and emergencies that pushed even the strongest pilots toward panic, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for the sound of both engines shutting down at 32,000 feet over the cold, unforgiving Pacific. For a moment, the world fell completely silent. No thrust. No control. No time. Just the terrible realization that she was now falling, fast, in a machine that was no longer a machine, only a metal coffin dropping through turbulent sky. Elena had always been the pilot who never hesitated, the one who could compute pressure readings and structural limits while others froze. But even her body betrayed her now with the kind of fear that squeezes the lungs and stiffens the hands. She tightened her grip on the stick, trying to steady a jet that no longer obeyed her. The G-forces pushed her downward as the nose dipped sharply, and the horizon tilted into a nightmare blur. She tried a restart protocol, nothing. She tried the auxiliary ignition, silent. She shut off all power and attempted the last chance reset every pilot is trained to fear, because it means everything else has already failed. But the jet remained unresponsive, shuddering as the wind roared past the canopy like a scream. She was falling. All she could think of, strangely, was her father's voice echoing from her childhood. He had been an Air Force mechanic for 30 years and raised her around engines that roared loud enough to shake bones. He used to tell her that aircraft were like people, resilient but unpredictable, always trying to find a way to survive even when the world broke around them. But as the altimeter numbers spun downward like a clock counting her final seconds, Elena felt no comfort from that memory. She was alone in the cold grip of gravity, and the storm outside was only getting stronger. The mission had begun like any other routine reconnaissance sweep: calm waters, steady formation, a clear objective. But an unexpected squall front had rolled in faster than forecasts predicted, disrupting electronics and scattering her squadron formation. Elena, being the lead pilot, made the call to continue forward, believing the storm would pass soon. But the deeper they flew, the angrier the sky became, until lightning carved through the clouds and turned her instruments unreliable. One bolt, far too close, had been the last thing she noticed before her entire jet flickered like a dying flame, and then plunged into silence. Now, tumbling downward, she fought to stay conscious. The cockpit trembled violently, each spin making her vision narrow. Clouds whipped around her like chaotic gray walls, and every instinct screamed at her to eject. But ejecting into a storm this violent was a death sentence. The winds alone could snap her spine or drag her into the ocean with no way to radio for help. She had one chance, and one chance only: regain control manually, even if the jet was essentially a powerless glider. Deep inside, she felt something shift, not in the jet, but in herself. A strange, fierce calm. The kind of calm born from years of training, countless hours above the clouds, and the unspoken oath every pilot takes the day they solo: when everything fails, you do not. She inhaled deeply, forced her trembling muscles to obey her, and began preparing for the maneuver no one teaches, no simulator allows, and no textbook recommends: a controlled aerodynamic roll into a gravity-assisted dive, using raw wind resistance to stabilize the aircraft's fall. It was as dangerous as it sounded. If she timed it wrong, the fuselage would snap. If she misjudged her altitude, she would hit the ocean before regaining lift. If she panicked for even a fraction of a second, the storm would claim her forever. She steadied her breathing, watching the altimeter drop: 24,000, 20, 19. Every second was a slice of her life slipping away. She pulled the stick sharply to the left, letting the jet's limp wings catch the wind just enough to tilt into a roll. The aircraft jerked violently, but the rotation began. She counted silently in her mind, feeling the air pressure building against the frame. That pressure was her enemy, but also her only ally now. She forced the jet into a downward spiral, the clouds spinning into streaks of gray and white around her. The maneuver was brutal, throwing her against the straps and blurring her vision with force, but slowly, painfully, the jet began to level. She wasn't falling now, not freely, at least. The storm had become the tool she needed. She attempted the engine restart again. Still nothing. But she wasn't done. With the jet stabilized into a shallow descent, she remembered a method her father once mentioned, not for jets, but for old prop aircraft, using the natural airflow to spin the turbines manually. It was reckless, nearly impossible with a modern twin-engine fighter, but if she could angle the nose downward at just the right pitch without losing control again, the rushing wind might jolt the turbines enough to trigger a passive ignition. The ocean appeared beneath her now, dark, churning, endless. 14,000 feet. 13. She angled the nose carefully, letting the downward momentum feed into the turbines. The cockpit trembled so violently that her teeth rattled. Warning lights flashed incessantly. Sweat ran down her forehead, blurring her eyes. She repeated to herself that this was not the end, not today, not like this. Then, at 9,000 feet, a faint sound flickered through the silence, a weak, sputtering cough from the right engine. Elena almost cried. She adjusted the pitch, praying that the sudden pressure wouldn't blow the turbine apart. The engine coughed again, louder this time, then roared violently as the ignition caught. Power surged through half the jet, jerking it sideways as the left engine remained dead. With one functional engine, the jet was unstable, aggressive, and prone to rolling. But one engine was life. One engine was hope. She fought to stabilize the aircraft, pushing against the asymmetric thrust that pulled her constantly to the side. The storm was thinning, pale sunlight cracked through the clouds in bright golden veins, giving her a faint glimpse of the world she still hoped to return to. But she was dangerously low now, barely 5,000 feet above open water with no guarantee the engine would hold. She radioed the base, static. The storm was still interfering. She was on her own. As she approached clearer skies, she saw the distant outline of a small, uninhabited island. A terrible landing option, but the only one she had. With one engine screaming and the jet shaking beyond its tolerance, she lowered altitude, preparing to skim over the waves and attempt a controlled emergency descent. The ocean wind hit her aircraft like a wall, but she held firm, teeth clenched, heart pounding with raw determination. She remembered her fellow squadron members, somewhere behind her, trusting she had made the right call. She remembered the students she had trained, the speeches she had given about courage, resilience, and calm under pressure. She remembered her father's weathered hands guiding her toward her first cockpit, telling her that some people were born for the sky. She refused to die in it. The single engine surged once more, giving her enough lift to clear the jagged edge of the island. She found a flat stretch of sand and lowered the landing gear, although she wasn't certain they had extended fully, the warning system wasn't responding. She prayed silently and pulled the jet upward slightly, slowing her descent, then let the weight of the aircraft drop onto the sand. The impact was brutal. Sparks flew beneath her. The jet skidded across the ground, tearing through sand and palm shrubs, jerking violently as the landing gear bent under pressure. The cockpit shook like an earthquake before the jet finally came to a grinding halt just feet away from a rocky outcrop. Elena sat frozen for a moment, barely breathing. When she finally exhaled, it came as a shaky, broken gasp. She removed her helmet and felt tears run down her cheeks, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of surviving what should have been her final flight. Hours later, she was rescued by a search and rescue helicopter. When the crew opened her cockpit canopy, they found her still sitting there, staring at the broken jet that had somehow carried her safely to ground. They called her a miracle. Her base commander called her a hero. Her fellow pilots embraced her with shock and awe. But she felt none of that. She only felt gratitude, for the storm that spared her, the instincts that guided her, and the strange, quiet voice inside her that refused to let her give up.